And good morning. Welcome to Courageous Path to Freedom, session number 3. Our theme for today is forgiving others and obeying God is the only way to really live and be free. And our two stories today again will feature Joseph, who brought his family down to Egypt so he could take care of them, and Moses, who lived 400 years later. We'll start with Joseph. As we learned in the previous two sessions, Joseph didn't get along with his older brothers. There was a lot of anger and resentment and jealousy in that family, and it led the 10 older brothers to do something very wicked. They mistreated their brother Joseph. They sold him into slavery. They took his beautiful coat that their father had given just Joseph, and they dipped it in animal's blood and carried it back to their father to deceive their father, to lie to him, to make him think that a wild animal had killed Joseph so he wouldn't go looking for him. That was a terrible, terrible lie and a terrible secret to keep all that time. It ate away at them inside. They knew they had done something really, really wrong. They knew their father was grieving. They didn't have any way to go find Joseph and make it all right again. So they just kept on holding on to the secret and not telling their father the truth. Meanwhile, down in Egypt, Joseph had gone through some hard times. He had been falsely accused of a crime. He'd been put in prison for something he did not do. Then he was able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker. The cupbearer got out of prison, told Pharaoh about Joseph. Pharaoh had some dreams he didn't understand. Joseph was called up to interpret the dreams for Pharaoh. Joseph told Pharaoh what's going to happen. Because Joseph gave credit to God. He said, God's the one who lets people know the meaning of dreams. Joseph kept his character. He kept a loving heart and a forgiving spirit. And Pharaoh had put him in charge of holding aside some of the food during the good years so that people could have food to eat when it was bad. I've got here a sample of what some wheat would look like out in the field before it's been cut with a sickle. Some of you may remember Mr. Barker in our science demonstration showed a sickle and how crops like wheat would be harvested. This is what wheat would look like when it was standing out in the field. And I happen to have a bag of it. They would get it, they would grind it into grain and flour. You may have some flour or some grains in your family kitchen that you could use to show what it looks like when they're ready to turn the wheat into foods to eat, like this bread that I have here as an example. The 7 good years have happened. They've had crops in Egypt that were very, very successful. They wisely set aside some in storehouses to save for the time that they knew was coming when there would be famine in the land. Sure enough, now they're 2 years into the famine. And they know, because of the dream that Pharaoh had, that Joseph was able to interpret, that the famine was going to last for 7 years. They're only 2 years into it. But there's food in Egypt because Joseph had wisely set aside 20%, enough to be able to feed all the people in the land during the entire time of the plague. Well, the famine was severe, not just in Egypt, but in other countries too. Joseph's father and brothers up in Canaan were experiencing famine too. It got to the point where they were running out of food. And so Joseph's father, Jacob, called his sons together and he said, look, we've got money, but we don't have food. I've heard from some of those caravan traders that there's food down in Egypt. You take this money and go down into Egypt and buy some food and bring it back to us. Jacob had 12 sons, He had the 10 older sons, Joseph, whom he thinks is dead, but Joseph's really alive and well down in Egypt, and Joseph's younger brother Benjamin, who was born when Joseph was still a very small boy. Joseph and Benjamin's mother has died. Jacob doesn't want to risk sending Benjamin, even though Benjamin's now a grown man, with his older brothers, because Benjamin is the only one left of the 2 sons of Rachel. So he sends the 10 older brothers down. There's a long line of people waiting to see Joseph. Joseph is in charge of the storehouse. People would come up. They would ask for food. They would present what they have, either to have an exchange or money that they had to try to get food, and Joseph would either approve or deny the deal. When he sees his brothers coming as a group, it's been 20 years. Joseph was sold into slavery when he was 17. He's now in his late 30s. He's now somewhere between 37 to 39 years of age. He recognizes his brothers. They're older, so is he, but they still dress like Canaanite shepherds. And they're all together, and he recognizes them. But they don't recognize Joseph. Why? Because Joseph has been in Egypt now for 20 years. Joseph isn't being called Joseph. He's being called by the Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. Joseph is the number 2 person in the entire country of Egypt. He's like the vice president. He dresses like an Egyptian. He's got an Egyptian girl who is his wife. He's got 2 sons of his own who've been born to him while he's down in Egypt. A lot of time has passed. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Why would they? They wouldn't have any way of dreaming that the brother that they had mistreated and sold into slavery 2 decades earlier, 20 years ago, would now be the number 2 official in all of Egypt. When they come, they're speaking their Hebrew language. They don't know that Joseph understands that language and can hear every word they're saying. Joseph is speaking the Egyptian language, and he's talking to his own brothers through an interpreter, because Joseph realizes they don't recognize me. In the conversation with them, he decides to put them to a test to see if their hearts have really changed from the way they mistreated him so long ago. And they reveal to him that they have a father back in Canaan and one younger brother, and lets Joseph know, my father and my youngest brother are alive. He can see his 10 older brothers. He just knows they don't recognize him. He tells them, I don't believe your story. He knows they're telling the truth, but he's putting them to a test. He said, I'm going to give you a chance to prove that you're an honest person. I'm going to let you have all the grain that you're asking for. We're going to sell you this grain. You'll be able to carry it back to feed your families. But just to prove that you're really honest men and that you're not here to spy on us and see if you can come down and invade and take away our food, here's what you have to do. You're going to have to leave one of your brothers here with me. You go back and you bring your youngest brother back with you the next time you come. If you don't bring that youngest brother, I won't see you and I won't sell you any more grain, and I won't let the one who's here leave to go back with you. They go back and they tell their father. When they get back to Canaan and they tell their father Jacob what's happened, he knows right off the bat, where's Simeon? Simeon's the one who was told to stay behind. Where is Simeon? And they tell him what the man in Egypt, they don't even know his name. The man in Egypt said we had to leave one of our number behind, and the next time we come for grain, we have to take Benjamin with us. Jacob's upset. He now thinks he's not only lost Joseph, he thinks Simeon is gone, and he's worried about Benjamin, you want to take Benjamin? You can't have Benjamin. He's the only one of Rachel's sons that I have left. 2 more years pass. They use up all the food that they had brought back with them, and it gets down to the point where they're just about out of food. And Jacob will tell his sons, take the money that was put in your sacks when you came back. They didn't know why their money appeared in their sacks. Joseph had put it there. Take the money from the first time, take some more money, go buy some more food. And his sons reminded him, Dad, the man in Egypt said he won't even see us. We'll be wasting our time to go. If we don't take Benjamin with us, we can't go. Reuben, the oldest son, asked his father to trust him. Reuben had already done something very, very wicked that his father knows about. Reuben doesn't know that his dad knows. And when his dad tells him, no, I'm not going to trust you to handle this task, Reuben doesn't know why. He'll find out later on that his secret is already out and Dad knows what he did. But Judah, one of the other brothers, said, Dad, trust me. I won't come back to you myself. You can do anything you need to me. Hold me responsible. I promise I'll take good care of Benjamin and I'll bring him back safely to you. When they're almost out of food, Jacob very reluctantly decides, okay, you can take Benjamin with you. They'll all go back. Benjamin will be with them. When Joseph sees them coming, he tells his steward, have them come to my house. They're going to eat with me. They are carried to Joseph's house. They still don't know it's Joseph. The table's been laid out for a party, kind of like you might have a special meal for Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, some special occasion. And they're told where to sit. And when they're told where to sit, they realize, wait a minute, we've been set down in birth order. Now, if they were still boys and young teenagers, it would be easier to know who's older and who's younger. You can tell when somebody's growing up which one looks like a teenager, maybe 15, 16, old enough to drive, which one looks like they're about ready to get out of middle school, which one's in elementary school, which one's a kindergartner or a toddler. But they're all grown-ups now, and so they're amazed that they've been seated in birth order from oldest to youngest. Joseph comes, sits at the table. They're all served a tremendous meal. Joseph realizes instantly that's Benjamin, his full brother. Joseph is so overcome with emotion that he has to step out of the room and compose himself for a little bit. He cries in private because he realizes he's finally getting to see his family again, and he's about to reveal himself to his family. He doesn't know whether his brothers will be happy to see him or not, other than Benjamin, but he's also heard that his father's still alive, and Joseph can't wait. It's been 22 years. He wants to see his family. He wants his family to be put back together. He goes back into the dining room, tells all the servants to leave, and then he reveals to his brothers, guys, it's me. I am Joseph. At first the brothers are stunned. Then they're a little bit worried. Uh-oh, what if he turns around and does to us the same kind of mean things that we did to him? But Joseph didn't. He saw to it that they all were given plenty to eat. He gave a whole lot of extra food to his brother Benjamin. They hug on each other. They cry. They're forgiven for what they've done to him. And he sends them back with grain, and he puts grain in their sacks, but he also tells a servant, put their money in and put my personal goblet, the one I drink out of, in the youngest one's sack. They're allowed to leave. They're going back to their father. It's still part of a test. Joseph wants to make really sure that his older brothers have repented and that they really know they've been forgiven. he sends his servants to chase after them, catch up with them. One of you took my master's cup, the cup that he uses. Whoever is found with it has to come and be our slave. And of course they deny it because they know they didn't take the cup. Everybody's sacks of flour are inspected, and when it gets to Benjamin, the cup is found there. Now it's time for Judah to step up and keep his word. They all go back to Joseph's house, and Joseph tells them, Benjamin is going to have to stay here with me because he took my cup. He didn't really take the cup, and Joseph knows it. He's testing to see if his brothers really will try to defend their brother. Judah steps up and he says, please listen to me. We told you the first time we were here that we had an elderly father and a younger brother, and we told you that this boy had another brother who has died. Because Judah didn't know that he had been talking to Joseph until Joseph revealed himself to him. Please, 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 let me be the boy's slave. Let him go back to his father. Joseph tells him, I am Joseph. A little bit earlier, I mentioned the banquet table. Joseph had not revealed who he was until it was time for that cup. Joseph now lets him know, I'm Joseph. It's all right. You've just proven to me that you really have learned to care about your brothers. You go back home, get our father, get all of your wives and children and your cattle and all your possessions. Come down here because the famine's not over yet. It's going to be several more years of famine. I want you to come down here where I can take care of you. They'll go back. They'll get their father. This time they're going to have to tell their father what happened with that coat. They're going to have to admit that they had sold Joseph into slavery and that they had let their father believe the lie all this time. Their father Jacob doesn't hold it against them. He forgives his sons for what they've done to him. They all go down. They're going to stay in the land where Joseph will take care of them. Joseph will tell Pharaoh his family is coming. Pharaoh is grateful to Joseph for what he's done for his country. Pharaoh will tell Joseph, you let your family live in the best land in all of Egypt. People of different cultures, Egyptian and Hebrew, they learned to get along with each other. Within Joseph's family, they'd had a lot of hurts. People had done mean things to each other. They'd told lies. They'd got angry. They had gotten jealous. They had done harmful things, but they were willing to forgive each other. God wants us to forgive when people do us wrong. Our second story on forgiving others and obeying God involves Moses. 400 years after Joseph's time. I left the plagues out here from yesterday's story because Moses had to go to Pharaoh each and every time. He warned Pharaoh of God's judgment, of the first plague, of the waters turning to blood, of the second plague, where the frogs came out and spread disease all over the place, of the third plague, where the flies and the lice came out and caused a lot of disease, of the disease that infected the cattle so that the animals died and they couldn't use them for milk and they couldn't use them for meat, of the wild beasts coming in to the populated areas and feeding on the carcasses and sometimes attacking and killing people, of the disease that broke out on the people's skin, the boils, of the hail falling out of the sky that not only could hit somebody in the head and cause severe damage to them, but could damage their homes, punch a hole in their roof, could kill their animals outside in the field, could damage their crops, of the locust flying in and eating up everything in sight so there was nothing left for the people, of darkness coming upon the land where they couldn't see. Have you ever been maybe on a trip where you went into a cave and the leader of the tour turned out the lights and you were in total darkness, or you got in an inside room where there were no windows, no mirrors, the door shut all the way to the floor so that you couldn't even see a crack, and you turn out the lights. Darkness makes people very uncomfortable. There's comfort in light. It was dark for 3 days. For each of these plagues, Moses had to trust God that whatever God said was going to happen would happen. And he had to be willing to speak up and tell the truth. Each time, Pharaoh didn't listen. For the first 9 plagues, the Hebrew people were automatically exempt. They're all together up in Goshen. Goshen is, if you can see on the map here, I'll stand up for just a minute and walk back to it. You can see on the map where the Nile River runs toward the Mediterranean, and where you see a lot of river branches there. Wherever there's water, there's a place where people can live, as opposed to out in the middle of the desert where there's very little water, and therefore very little food and animals and crops. Joseph's family, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, they're all up here in Goshen in the best land of Egypt. For most of these plagues, they didn't have to do anything. But for the 10th plague, Moses had to get the people together, and they had to decide, were they going to trust God and obey him or not? They were told that for this last plague, you are to take a male lamb without a blemish, and you're to kill that lamb at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and take some of the blood from the lamb, dip it in hyssop, and put it up on the doorpost and on the 2 sides, and stay inside and consume that lamb and wait for the death angel to pass over. It was the Passover, the last of the 10 plagues. Our communion in modern Christianity, I've got a little self-contained communion kit here that I'm about to open up. For those of you who are watching the VBS, if you want to come by either Cool Springs Church or the chapel, we're going to make some take-home kits available for folks. And the take-home kits will include, if you want it, some of these self-contained communion kits. Alternatively, you could get some grape juice and some unleavened bread, like a saltine cracker, to use at home as a teaching demonstration. They were told to make bread without yeast. Yeast takes time to rise. In the Bible, yeast was always a symbol of sin. So they made the bread without yeast, so it stayed flat. Looks like this. This bread over here took time to bake. Miss Annie is going to do a baking demonstration for us for VBS, and she'll walk people through how to bake bread. If people don't already know, most people just go and buy their bread from a store, but some people have bread baking machines, and Miss Annie's going to demonstrate how to make bread at home. You could do that if you wanted to. During that first Passover, they were told to consume the lamb, to eat the unleavened bread, the bread of haste, to remind them about what God was about to do for them. So since I've already opened this one up and I've touched it, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about why in our churches today, when we have communion, we'll pass out unleavened bread. Sometimes it'll be in a tray and people will just take one. Sometimes people will go up to their minister or their priest and receive the host from the minister. Sometimes you'll use these self-contained kits, but we don't use lamb. Why? Because Jesus was celebrating Passover when he was in the upper room with his disciples the night before he was crucified. And even though there was lamb on Jesus' table, he reached for the unleavened bread and he told his disciples, "This is my body, which is to be broken for you." And he took the bread and he broke it, and he ate some and he's handed some to his disciples. So I'm going to go ahead and eat this bread. If you've been in a church service and you have seen communion, depending on how big or small your communion bread was, you might or might not have broken it. But it represents the body that Jesus was going to sacrifice for our sins. How do we know that? Because Jesus told us so. We can find the story of Jesus celebrating the Last Supper. It was a Passover in all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It says in the Gospels that after the supper, Jesus took the cup. And so I'm going to pull back the individual peel here on this little communion cup. And it's got grape juice in it because that's what this manufacturer used. Some churches use wine, some use grape juice. In church, when they're having communion, the pastor, the chaplain, the priest will hold up the cup and will say the same words Jesus said at the Last Supper. He took the 3rd cup, the cup of redemption, and he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." Jesus knew he was going to go die on the cross for us. Whenever you drink it, remember me. Jesus did that at the Last Supper. His disciples all participated in it. Why? Because they were Jewish people, and every year they would celebrate the Passover. They were remembering what God did for them. You can find the story of Passover in Exodus chapter 12. And so right now I'm going to go ahead and consume this grape juice. Parents, even if your children are not yet believers in Jesus, you can show them the elements as a teaching tool for them. It's been almost 20 years ago. I had done the Catholic Sunday School because I was director of religious education, and I knew that one of the Protestant services was going on in the main post chapel, and it happened to be Communion Sunday. I had to wait. I couldn't be in the church service for the entire service because I was responsible for seeing to it that students were taken care of over in the Catholic Sunday School. The last student was picked up, so I was able to slide into church just in time to participate in the communion service they were having that day, which was at the end of the service. Because I had to slip into the back, there was just a very few places I could choose to sit, and that one place I could see where was a place to sit was right behind a family. Dad's on the end of the pew. The mama's sitting next to him. They had 2 children. One of them was a little boy who looked like he was 4, maybe 5, but really he looked more like he was about 4 years old. And then an older brother who looked like he was about 11 or 12. In the chapel and in most churches, when communion is served, if they don't have people come up and get these individual cups, they'll pass around the trays. That's what they were doing at chapel that day. The ushers came by, and the first tray that they had the bread in it. The father picked up a piece of bread. He hands the tray to his wife. She picks up a piece of bread, and she passes the tray over the head of her little son to her older son. The older brother gets the bread, and the tray keeps going down the pew. The little fellow's just looking around. A minute or so later, another usher comes by, and this time he's got the tray with the individual cups. Dad takes a cup, Mama takes a cup, passes the tray over the head of her younger son again. Big brother gets a cup, and the tray goes down. Well, that's the second time the little guy hasn't been given anything. He's looking around. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's interpreting it the only way he knows. It looks like everybody's getting snack except him. He tugs on his mama's sleeve, and he says out loud, "Mama, Mama, why can't I have a snack?" Well, we're in church. Mama doesn't want to answer his question right then. She's just trying to get him to be quiet. It was a great question. He doesn't know what's happening. He thinks he's being left out, and he is, but he doesn't know why. As soon as church was over with, I went up to the chaplain and told him what had happened and said, "Next Sunday, you got to give me all the kids." So the next Sunday, as soon as they were getting ready for the sermon, the chaplain, it happened to be Chaplain Barry White. Some of you may remember him. He's retired now. He told the parents that he wanted all the kids, ages 3 and above, to get up and go with Miss Nancy for a teaching on communion. We carried them into another room, and we showed them some of the snacks we use for Sunday school and other types of fellowships. And we had a communion tray set up, and we explained to them, this is the host, this is why it's unleavened bread. We let them taste it. They could see that, all right, this wafer, it really doesn't have much of a taste. It's just sort of there. Doesn't taste bad. Doesn't taste good either. It just sort of is. Grape juice. Some people like grape juice, some don't. But we explained to them what it means. Why Jesus held it up and said, this is my body broken for you. This is the blood of my new covenant. There are ways you can teach the faith at home. Moses had to be willing to rely on God to make each of these plagues come about. When it came time for the death of the firstborn, the people had to be willing to listen to Moses about preparing the lamb properly, about using unleavened bread. Drink isn't even mentioned in Exodus. It is in the New Testament. They had to be willing to obey God, even when they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They had to be willing to obey God, and they had to be willing to forgive. Joseph had to forgive his brothers. Moses had to be forgiven by God for having accidentally killed a man. Moses had to be willing to trust God that he would be safe going back to Egypt. Moses had to trust God to make sure that everything God said would happen. And Moses had to be willing to forgive Pharaoh for not listening to God any of these times. Forgive others, trust God, and you'll really be free. We have some more things to teach you. We'll see you again tomorrow. And for session number 4, we're going to learning about how we can rely on God to take care of our future. Thanks for watching.
Good morning again, boys and girls and families. Mark Barker here with some more science from Egypt. Egyptians were among the first people to make ink and to make toothpaste. They made toothpaste 2 different kinds of ways, and so we're going to do both ways to make toothpaste today. First, they had to have a toothbrush. And so to get a toothbrush, they would take a branch, and then they would cut it down and get the leaves and stuff off of it. Then they would take this end and they would cut it and shape it, and then they would pound it, and then they could dip that in their toothpaste, and they would brush their teeth with the frayed ends and soft ends of a stick. So what was in their toothpaste? Well, they made 2 kinds. One kind was that they would take some rock salt, and I have some of my wife's sea salt here because it's grains. It's kind of like rocks. So they put some salt in there. Then they would take grains of pepper, and they would put some pepper in. Sounds like good toothpaste, doesn't it? Then they would take some iris plant flower leaves. These are dried iris flowers. Then they would take something like mint, because this didn't taste good, and they would put some dried mint in. Okay? They would put the dried mint in there, and then they would get them a rock. They got their bowl, and they crush that toothpaste. Just keep crushing that up until they get a nice powder out of it. And once they got that all, whoo, that smells good. Once they got that all crushed out, they take their toothpaste, get a little water on it. I'm going to go ahead and mix some water in this toothpaste. Get that on there, and then they, that's awful. And that's how they would do it. Another way they would make toothpaste, they would take burnt eggshells. I got some burnt eggshells here. You can see what that looks like. And they would take some ashes from the fire. I got some ashes here, and they put that in there. They also used ashes in making it. Then they put some pumice in there and a couple other things, and then take their rock, crush that all up. Then they'd mix that with a little water. And get their toothbrush again. I don't know. Tastes like a fireplace to me. But anyway, that's how they would do toothpaste. Now they made black ink. To make black ink, they would take that soot again. And they put some soot in. And then they would use plant gum. And you can, I'm using cornstarch because that comes from a plant. And it's like a pasty kind of stuff. Put that in there, and then they would use some beeswax. I didn't have any beeswax, but I got some honey. So you can put some honey in there, and that'll thicken up a little bit. And again, you got to take something and stir that up. Get that all mixed. And once they get those ingredients nice and mixed, you got to put a little water in it to make ink out of it. Need some more black. And they would use different plants to make different colors of ink. But if they wanted black ink, they use the ashes from the fire. And you can see we got a nice black substance here, and let me get off camera. I forgot my brush. And we could use something like this plate right here, and then we could make our hieroglyphics with it, whatever they wanted to do, and that's how they would write with black ink. See you again tomorrow.
And welcome back, boys and girls and families. This is Courageous Path to Freedom Bible Story Session number 3. Today we're going to talk about Joseph being in charge in Egypt and forgiving his brothers and taking care of them. The story will be found for moms and dads out there in Genesis chapters 42 through 45. There's been 7 years of plenty in Egypt where they were able to set aside a percentage of all the food that they grew into storehouses. Now they're 2 years into 7 years of famine. Joseph has been living in Egypt for well over 20 years now. He's got an Egyptian wife. He's had 2 sons who are beginning to grow up. Joseph has been now in charge of the grain of Egypt for 9 years, the 7 good years, and now 2 years into the famine. The famine is so severe, and it covers more than just Egypt. It covers some other territory too. I'm going to go over here to a map and show you real briefly a little bit of geography that we need to learn. Joseph's family was up here in Canaan. That's this area here. But Joseph had been sold into slavery here in Egypt, which we can see the Nile River here. It's a long way from Canaan to Egypt. The famine was so severe that it covered this whole section of the world. So not only are the Egyptians coming to where Joseph has the storehouses, and Joseph is seeing to it that everybody's getting enough food to eat, but now people are coming from other countries, and they're bringing the money that they have, or some goods that they have, to try to exchange for food. And Joseph's brothers have come down to Egypt to buy food, because up in Canaan, they were having the same drought, and Jacob, their father, gathered his sons together and told them, we're out of food, we've got some money, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt, I need you to go down and buy as much as you can buy and bring it back here so that all of us can live and eat, because see, the brothers have grown up too. They've got families of their own. There were 12 brothers in all. One of them was Joseph, and they had sold him into slavery many, many years before. Joseph had a younger brother, Benjamin, who was not part of the group that sold him into slavery. Benjamin doesn't know anything about it. But because Joseph is dead, their father is really hanging on to Benjamin. He doesn't want Benjamin to leave home. He doesn't want to risk Benjamin getting hurt or killed, because Benjamin is the only remaining son from his wife Rachel, because he thinks Joseph is dead. So the 10 older brothers are told, go down to Egypt and buy the grain. They go to Egypt. They have no idea that the person that they're about to run into, who's in charge of selling the grain for Egypt, is their own brother Joseph. It's been 20 years. Joseph dresses like an Egyptian. He speaks the Egyptian language to people because he's working in Egypt. He's even called by the Egyptian name of Zapanath-Paneah. They don't recognize Joseph. In their wildest dreams, they couldn't ever think that the brother that they sold into slavery at age 17 is now in his late 30s and is the number 2 man in all of Egypt. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. He could see them in the crowds of people that are coming up. And when they come up to ask him to buy grain like everybody in line ahead of them, he decides to put them to a test. He says, "You're not from Egypt? I think you're a spy. I think you just come here to scout out where our food is so that you can come back and try to take from us." And they said, "Oh no, we're not spies. We're honest men. We're all part of one family. We've just come to buy food to feed our families." They have a conversation that you can read about in Genesis chapter 42 and 43. And they reveal that their father is back in Canaan along with their younger brother Benjamin. When Joseph hears this, he now has a strong urge to finally get to be back with his father and his long-lost younger brother. But he's not sure if these 10 older brothers can be trusted yet or not. So he tells them, "All right, I'm gonna sort of trust you. You can have all the grain that you need, but one of you is going to have to stay here in Egypt until the rest of you go back and you bring back this younger brother that you're talking about. Then I'll know you're not spies." He selects one of the brothers, Simeon, and Simeon is forced to stay behind in Egypt while the others take their sacks of grain, they load them up on their camels and their donkeys, and they head all the way back to Canaan. Takes them quite a while to make the journey. The first night when they stopped, one of the brothers opened up his sack of grain just to get enough food out to feed themselves and his animal. And when he did, he discovered that all the money that they had given to the Egyptians was in his sack. They were frightened. They didn't know what this meant. Some of them were beginning to wonder, maybe this is how we're being punished by God for what we did to Joseph years ago. Others are saying, no, it can't be that. But they go back home with the food and they tell their father what happened. He's upset. He's already thinks that Joseph is dead. Now he thinks Simeon has been left behind too, and they explain to him, the man told us we could have the grain, but we can't get Simeon back unless we take Benjamin with us the next time to prove that we were telling the truth. And he's like, no, you're not going to take Benjamin. He's all I have left of Rachel's children. Joseph is gone and I can't risk losing Benjamin. No, we'll stay here. They do. They stay there, they use the grain. Simeon's still down in Egypt, he's not allowed to leave. And finally, they get to where they're now running low on food. Somebody has got to go back to Egypt. Reuben, the oldest son, tells his father, look, trust me, if I don't bring him back, you can take my 2 sons. But Reuben had done something else to displease his father, and Reuben didn't know his father already knew about it. So Jacob would not listen to Reuben. Then another son, Judah, spoke up and said, Father, let me take Benjamin. I will guarantee his safety. If I can't bring him back, I won't come back. But the only way we're going to get Simeon, the only way we're going to get more food is if we take Benjamin with us. The man told us he won't even see us again unless we bring Benjamin. Trust me. And because Jacob had no reason not to trust Judah, he allowed Benjamin to go. When they go back, Joseph can see them coming from a distance, and he realizes that Benjamin is with them. He can see all the brothers. When they arrive, they're told to go to Joseph's house, that they're going to eat with him that day. The banquet table is laid out, and the servant arranges them in birth order, from oldest to youngest. And they're surprised because these are now grown men. It's not like in your family where you may have dad and mom who are grown-ups, and maybe there's a teenager or a middle school age child or a preschool child, and you can tell who's older and younger. These are all grown-ups now. But they're arranged in birth order, and they wondered what it meant. Joseph came in, and he didn't let them know that he could understand what they were saying, because you see, they were speaking to each other in Hebrew. Joseph understood Hebrew, but he was speaking the language of Egyptians. They think he's an Egyptian. He's listening to them talk. He has dinner with them. He provides more food for Benjamin than anybody else. And he hears the brothers talking, and Simeon is restored to them. And Joseph is so overwhelmed with, I finally get to see my brother again, but he doesn't know who I am, that he can't hold his emotions back. He asked all the servants to leave the room. He goes out of the room and goes off to cry for a few minutes. He comes back in, and when he comes back in, he just can't keep the secret any longer, and he tells them, I am your brother Joseph. And he calls them by name, and they're astonished. They can't believe it. They thought Joseph had been sold into slavery and that he would never be seen or heard from again. But not only is Joseph alive and well, he's in charge of Egypt's grain. He's the one who provided them food, and instead of him being angry at them for having sold him into slavery, having done something mean to him, he's forgiving them. And he tells them, you've got to go and get my father and bring your families down here, because this famine is going to last for another 5 years, and I want to take care of you. When they go back to tell their father the good news that Joseph is alive, Jacob can barely believe it, but they all let him know, yes, he's really alive, and he wants us to come down. Jacob will pick up all of his family. They'll all move down to Egypt, and for the rest of their lives, they will be allowed to live over in Egypt where the Nile Delta is at. It's called Goshen. It was the very best land in all of Egypt. Joseph met his father at the border and told him, I'm going to introduce you to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asks you what your occupation is, be sure to tell him you're a shepherd, so that he'll be sure to let you have the very best land in all of Egypt to live at. That's what Jacob did. That's what Pharaoh did. Joseph took care of his family for the rest of his life, for the rest of his father's life. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about the time came when Jacob knew it was about time for him to die, but he wanted to make sure he passed on a blessing to each of his children and wanted them to know what God's future promise held for them. Where God has a plan, not just for Joseph and his family, but God has a plan for each and every one of you. Tomorrow we're going to talk about more about how we will look to God and rely on Him to take care of His plans for our future. Sometimes, when bad things seem to happen to people, it's because God is setting in place the conditions for something good to happen later on. Like you're in school and you're taking a subject and maybe it's not your favorite subject, but you learn how to do the subject. And when you're an adult, you realize, oh, I needed this skill in how to do math or science or whatever it was you needed to learn to do, because now I can use this to take care of my family. We'll learn more next time we meet on how we can rely on God to take care of our future.
In the blink of an eye, Joseph moved from the prison to the palace, a place of incredible power. While Pharaoh gave Joseph a new job, clothes, jewelry, a name, and a wife, God gave Joseph incredible wisdom to save Egypt from famine. For 7 years, Joseph wisely and consistently gathered 1/5 of all crops grown in Egypt. And those 7 abundant years, Joseph collected so much grain that it was like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was so much to measure. Amazing, but soon the famine that God foretold came to Egypt. So now we know that Joseph got a new job. And boys and girls, do you think that Joseph enjoyed his new job? Well, let's see what happened. I still think of my family back in Canaan, but God has been good to me here in Egypt. For I know that God has brought me here for a reason. Remember those weird dreams Pharaoh had? You know, the cows and the grain? Well, those dreams came true. For 7 years, farmers grew plenty of good crops. What is your favorite food? Wait a minute, don't tell me. Find a partner and act out your favorite food for that person. See if your partner can guess. Now, does anybody like Brussels sprouts here? Can you raise your hand? I don't. Does anyone like broccoli?
I, Pharaoh, do not like Brussels sprouts.
All right. So here in Egypt, farmers grow all of their food along the banks of the Nile River. Every year, the Nile floods and the ground gets covered with black, mucky mud. You can grow anything in this stuff. For 7 years, the Nile flooded, and we had plenty of food. I collected 1/5 of the crops each year. Let's see how much 1/5 is. Now, if you were to curl up into a ball like a basket of grain, then I came and I took 1/5 out of this basket, this one and this one and this one, and then I stored them and I put them in a huge storehouse. They'd be safe. Oh, you can stop being baskets now. Our storehouses were overflowing, and it's a good thing too, because for the past year the Nile hasn't flooded. The crops didn't grow, so now it is my job to open up these big storehouses and give everyone a little bit of grain that is inside. I wonder about my family back in Canaan. The famine and the shortage of food is happening there too. I know they were mean to me, but they're still my family, and I miss them. Have you ever missed your family? Tell me about that. Tell me about a time when you've missed your family. I believe that God gives us wisdom, and He puts us here to help people, and He put us here to help people in Egypt. But I hope God gives wisdom to my family too. I want them to be okay. Who is someone that you think is wise? And why do you think that? I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer that. Who is someone you think that is wise, and why do you think that? I need to pray for wisdom. This is a big job, and I want to do the right thing. I'll bet there are times when you want to do the right thing as well. You know, since we're all God's followers here, would you join me in praying? Now, everybody get together with your family and take a minute to pray and ask God for His wisdom.
And good morning. This is Courageous VBS, Path to Freedom. This is session number 3. Our bakery shop, our food services, we called it farmers market, and our herbs and spices shops all kind of blended together because they all deal with food. So today we're going to be demonstrating some of the spices that were used to make food flavorful. And I'm still eating some of yesterday's sausage breakfast because it's good.
Good morning, I'm Dent, and we are going to talk about spices today. Our first spice is cinnamon. Cinnamon is considered better than gold years ago because it's used for diabetes, high blood pressure, for colds, stomach trouble. And we'll go to the next one. Cumin, which is a good seasoning and it helps with your digestion. And anise is good for fever and colds. And for turmeric. Turmeric is good for blood pressure, stomach problems also, and for indigestion.
We think that the ancient peoples were somehow not as smart as we are. They were actually very smart. They had to figure out through trial and error and experimentation what plants worked. It's amazing to me here in the 21st century that people who lived about 3800 BC, almost 4,000 years ago, knew about diseases like diabetes and knew what foods and what plants they could safely take to help combat disease. God's people were very smart. And good morning, welcome to session number 3 of Health, Beauty in Ancient Times. What I've got over here to my side is the makeup kit used by Mary Apel for our annual Living Last Supper out of the chapel, because we would have to have the men who were playing the parts of Jesus and the apostles wear some theatrical type makeup so that they would look good on camera. And this is her makeup kit, and out in front of her, I'm going to stand up for a minute and hold up just a few pieces. Out of that kit, very often they would have to use the eyeshadow, and they would have to use liners and different kinds of eyeshadow and brushes. And also there would be in here, if I can reach it, here we go, there would be some creams and lotions that would have to be used even for the guys to wear. And in ancient Israel and in ancient Egypt, they had to have certain things that they would do for their health and for looking good. In the Bible, in Leviticus chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14, they had rules that once they left Egypt, the Jewish people had rules on what was considered to be clean food and unclean food. And a lot of that had to do with, based on the conditions they're in, out in the desert, no refrigeration, no safe storage, that sort of thing. Certain things, if they ate them, could make them very sick or possibly cost them their lives. So they had foods that were okay for them to eat and foods that were forbidden for them to eat. In chapter 12 of Leviticus, they set up rules for purification after childbirth. A lot of that was for the health of the young mother. She needed to be able to rest and recover from childbirth. So you'll find in Leviticus chapter 12 some rules about her being set aside for a while and given a chance to rest, and a certain cleanliness ritual that she'd have to go through just for her own health before being returned to normal married life. Chapter 13 and 14 dealt a lot with rules about infectious skin diseases. The priests were functioning not only as the ministers, but they were also functioning as kind of like the doctors of the day. If someone came down with some sort of infectious skin disease, or if the dwellings appeared to have mold or some other kind of what we now know would be a disease-causing problem, the rules were laid out in Scripture. God gave the Israelites health rules to follow, and the priests would follow these rules, and they would inspect a person's skin, or they would inspect the dwelling that they were in, and they would either pronounce that area cleaned or not cleaned. If it was unclean, people couldn't go in there. If people had an infectious skin disease, they would have to be isolated from the camp. They might have certain rituals of washing that they had to do from time to time, just to make sure that they stayed healthy. Another thing that they did a little bit later on in their history, when they have the temple a steady place of worship, they will develop something called a mikveh. If we were spelling it in English, we would spell it M-I-K-V-E-H, mikveh. It was a ritual bath. The rule for that was that it had to be running water. It couldn't be a stagnant pool. So it would have to be from a spring, or there'd have to be a river nearby that ran through there. It had to, or some other source of continuously running water. Why? Because if you've ever seen a stagnant pond, you can tend to get mosquitoes and pond scum and that kind of thing on the pond, and it's just not good water. But running water, flowing water, continues to cleanse itself as it moves downstream, as it moves over rocks and whatnot. And so they had rules about ritually submersing themselves so that they would be clean when they went up into the temple. Well, during the time we're looking at for this VBS, they didn't have the temple yet. They were in Egypt, and then they were in the wilderness and at Mount Sinai on their way to their promised land. They were using a portable tabernacle, but they still had rules for the priest to wash their hands, to wash their bodies if they're going inside. Why? Because the priests are all day long touching the animals, handling the sacrifices, offering up the offerings of the grain offering and whatnot. And as they were touching all these things, you didn't have hand sanitizer in those days. They would have to wash their hands frequently in order to make sure that they stayed clean. So some of the things that they did for hygiene, Mr. Barker talked about how they had figured out how to make toothpaste and a toothbrush out of certain plants. The Israelites figured out that the parsley plant was not only something that they used for Passover to dip in the salt water and eat, because parsley is an edible plant, but parsley is also a natural breath mint. So they had all kinds of instructions that God gave them while they're in the wilderness. They're not just getting the Ten Commandments. They're getting an awful lot of other stuff that would help keep them healthy. And that's why throughout their history, the Jewish people who followed God's rules, particularly the ones that we find in Exodus and Leviticus, they just stayed healthier than other people. And some of the other nations around them wondered why these people aren't being stricken with the diseases that everybody else is. And that's because God cares about your health. So when you're studying hygiene in school, or when your parents are giving you instructions about you need to brush your teeth every day, or you need to do certain other things, wash your hands before dinner, it's actually going back to things that were in the Bible that God gave His people to let them know, I want you to stay healthy, I want you to be clean, I want you to be able to live a healthy life. We'll see you tomorrow. And good morning. Welcome to Courageous Path to Freedom VBS, day number 3. Nancy Jankoski, 10 left thumbs. Doretha Bennett, who is good with crafts, is here to teach us our 3rd day craft, which is about baby Moses. Our path to freedom started with Joseph being sent down into Egypt. Now 400 years have passed, and it's now time for God to raise up Moses to rescue the people and lead them to freedom in that promised land. But before Moses can be a leader, he first has to be a baby boy. And so today's craft is baby Moses.
Okay, the things you're going to need for this craft, construction paper. It doesn't matter. It could be copy paper. And what we'll like to do is we'll like to make the river, the Nile. We will use 2 different color shades of the blue. You can use a little bit of green in there if you would like. We will need baking cups. You will need glue, a glue stick. You will need a small popsicle stick. They come in this size. And the marker. And to get started is we're gonna you're gonna color this. You're gonna make the river. So it doesn't matter if you're not perfect or anything. All we want to do is to get it in there, get it colored, the variations of the blue. Okay, and then we'll need a pair of scissors. And we're going to cut the split. We're just going to fold the paper just a little bit into the river. And we're going to use the scissors to cut a split in it, which would be like this. It doesn't matter the length, as long as you don't go out of the paper. And then we're going to get one of these, the baking cups. And we're going to get one of these, and we're going to make the baby Jesus. That's why we can use the markers. We're going to make a face. You can put a little hair up there if you would like. And you can use construction paper, you can use cloth. And what you're going to do is just wrap him. And that's where the glue stick come in handy. And then you're going to put a little bit of glue stick on the back. And you're going to stick it into the cup. And then you're going to use the second stick will be stuck on the back of the paper. So you put a little glue back there. And you're going to stick your popsicle stick back there. You're going to let it dry for a little bit. And then what this is going to do is you're going to put it between this so you can see baby Moses go down the knob.
Oh, that's cute. He can actually move.
He can move. So that's all for that craft.
And good morning and welcome back to Ancient Life. And today we're going to talk about scribe school. We mentioned on Monday about the hieroglyphs, the first known alphabet that the Egyptians had. Mr. Barker did that in his science demonstration on how they made the ink. It's one of the earliest alphabets recorded for mankind. The Hebrew alphabet is also very, very old. And we talked in one of the adult Bible studies about how some scholars now, if they come from more liberal denominations, will try to say that Moses could not have written the first 5 books of the Bible that are attributed to him, or that Joshua couldn't have written the book of Joshua because ancient peoples didn't know how to write. Well, that's just wrong. The Bible text itself talks about people writing things down. We know for certain that the Egyptians knew how to write because we've got their alphabet right there behind us. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He was an Egyptian prince for the first 40 years of his life. He certainly knew how to write. So when we see in the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and we see in Joshua where people are being told to write God's word on their hearts, that they are reading God's word to them. In order to read something, you have to have an alphabet. You have to be able to write. So I'm going to hold up here very briefly for just a few seconds. Part of a wall chart that we would put up out at the chapel and we'll put up here at the church that shows the Hebrew alphabet, which starts with the letter A, Aleph. It's a silent letter. The second letter is B, Bet, and it'll end up with there's 3 or 4 of these. Here are some letters as we're continuing through the alphabet. Here are some more. And here's the final one that ends up with the Hebrew letter Tav. Tav over here looks kind of like a doorpost. That's the way the Hebrews write the letter now, but they didn't always write the letter Tav to make it look like the doorpost of the house. Doorpost of the house. Why would they make it look like that? Because in the story of the Exodus, the last of the 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn, what were the people told to do? The Israelites were told to take a male lamb without blemish, to sacrifice that lamb at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and to take some of the blood, use a hyssop plant to dip it in the animal's blood, and put it up on the doorpost and on the 2 sides of the house. When we were doing this teaching demonstration at various times out at the chapel, our Catholic students got it right off the bat, because part of their worship practice when they open up in prayer is to say, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, Protestant Christians don't do that, but Catholic Christians do that as a part of their act of worship. But that's not how the letter Tav was originally done. When it was originally written, it looked like a little plus sign or a little letter T. In fact, it looked like a cross. After Jesus' crucifixion, the Hebrews changed the way they wrote the letter Tav, the end of their alphabet, because Christians were running around telling people that Jesus was the Alpha and Omega. Now, those are Greek letters of the alphabet. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. And it means the beginning and the end. The Jewish people who didn't believe in Jesus got the implication right off the bat that beginning and end referring to Jesus, and that little letter Tav that looked like a cross, they changed the way they wrote the letter based on that. Our own word alphabet comes from Aleph and Bet, the first 2 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Some of you who have been participating in our Fort Rucker Religious Education Bible Study group and some of the other Bible study class pages, you know that I have put up some cartoons. I have subscribed to a Rabbi David Foreman's organization called alephbet.org. You can look it up online. And his ministry does some short teaching cartoons. They only deal with things that are in what we would call the Old Testament, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, or the prophets and writings. Why? Because he's Jewish. He doesn't have a New Testament in his Bible. But the alphabet and writing would have been very much a part of the lives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, down through history. Writing is the foundation for us to be able to read the scriptures, whether you're reading a Torah scroll, whether you're reading a modern Bible like the one I've got here, whether you're reading words to songs put up on a screen with modern technology, or whether you're using a hymn book and sheet music that has the words and the notes, the skill of writing and learning how to read and write is essential to worship. I've got laying here on the table some items that are used to worship God. This hymn book, the song book, our sack of plagues that we talked about in one of our previous sessions. Each of the plagues that came on Egypt was a contest between all the different false gods that the Egyptians worshipped and the one true God that Moses and the Israelites worshipped. The Egyptians had all kinds of idols. We've got a couple of things here that could be used as idols. A golden statue of, in this case, a giraffe, an animal that's native to Africa. Egypt is in Africa. A statue to a monkey. The Egyptians worshipped monkeys and birds and all kinds of animals. I also have here, borrowed from my husband's office, a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. This was one of the things that God gave Moses the instructions to have people build out of gold. The Ark of the Covenant, inside of it, they would have placed a copy of the 10 Commandments, the one that Moses took dictation from God on. The first set of tablets, God wrote with his own finger. But those were the ones that Moses broke when he came off the mountain and saw people in his Israelite camp worshiping a golden calf, one of the gods of the Egyptians. He got mad and he broke them. He had to go back up on the mountain with God, and this time Moses had to chisel out the tablets themselves. Tablets would have been in there. A little bit later on in our adult version of VBS, I'm going to bring in a tabernacle model and some scale model size temple furniture for everybody to see what they did to establish worship of God when they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So the Ten Commandments would have been in there, Aaron's rod that budded would have been in there, and a pot of manna, the food that they ate in the wilderness, would be in there. You'll get to see what manna looked like next week when Miss Annie does the baking demonstrations that'll be a part of our VBS. I'm holding up this lid because the lid that was on the top of the box had two cherubim, that's one of the classes of angels, with their wings folded and their heads bowed to make a mercy seat. Once a year, the high priest, Aaron, his sons, grandsons, as they proceeded through time, would be allowed to go into the innermost part of the tabernacle on one day of the year only to offer up a sacrifice of animal's blood and sprinkle it on the altar, seeking God's mercy and God's covering of their sins for another year. The Spirit of God would come down in the form of a pillar of smoke, and it would rest on what is called the mercy seat. One of the activities you might want to do as part of your family time is to have two people form their arms like this. One does it this way, one does the other way, and you make what's called the fireman's ladder, a seat that people can sit on if they're injured, and you could help somebody that's got an injured leg or foot, can't walk, and you form the fireman's ladder, and you can carry them to safety. Well, it forms a seat, and the Spirit of God would come and rest down on the seat. Some of the things we do in our modern worship in churches today, things like singing praise music, things like reading the scriptures, studying God's word, listening to a sermon, things like participating in communion. I'm going to hold up a couple of Passover plates here. This plate is part of our take-home kit for those who want to come by the church and the chapel and pick up copies of take-home kits. We'll have one paper plate that shows what a Passover tray would look like. I also have another Passover tray that we use when we do our Christ in the Passover teaching demonstrations. And I also have here a Kiddush cup. The Kiddush cup is used for communion. In Judaism, and some Christians are starting to adopt this custom too, when a new couple gets married, they're given a communion cup because the two, husband and wife, are becoming one flesh with God. If both members of the couple are believers in Jesus, husband and wife are both believers, sometimes they'll choose to have communion as part of their wedding ceremony, but it reminds them, this cup that they can take out every year and share together on their anniversary, reminds them that they are to be one with each other, just like when we become believers, we are to become one with God. Even if you're a married couple and you didn't get something like this when you got married, it's not too late. You could celebrate your next anniversary by reminding yourselves that you are to be one with each other, and we are to be one with the Lord. Thanks for watching.